We love you, truly. And before the story begins, I want you to know that your being here matters. You are cared for, more deeply than you may realize in this quiet moment. The simple fact that you've chosen to listen is enough. It means you've given yourself permission to rest, to wander softly into another world. And that is a small kind of courage. Before we begin the story, tell me, where in the world are you right now? What time is it where you are? Let your heart whisper the answer, even if no one hears. And now gently reach for your cup, take a sip of your coffee or tea, and let us step into the hidden history of a city most have forgotten, though it still hums at the edge of dreams. They say Wizard City was never truly built. It bloomed. It did not rise from stone quarries or from the stubborn hands of builders. Instead, it unfurled like a quiet flower that no one planted, but everyone somehow remembered. The streets shaped themselves around forgotten footsteps. The lanterns leaned forward, as if listening. And the air always carried the faint hush of something more, like the city itself was humming a lullaby too low for anyone to sing along, and in the middle of this city, a child was born. Not with trumpets or omens or proclamations. No, Wizard City did not shout. It whispered. And so when the boy came into the world, the only sign that something unusual had arrived was the faintest glow that pulsed through his tiny fingers. Not bright enough to light a room, not strange enough to terrify, just a warm flicker, like candlelight behind soft skin. His parents, ordinary keepers of a small window shop, simply wrapped him in a blanket and said, "He's warm. That's enough." The boy grew in a house filled with windows. His parents polished glass all day, frames of wood, frames of iron, panes of clear and panes of colored light. People came from across the city to buy windows from them, not because they were the strongest, but because sometimes, only sometimes, if you looked just right, you could see something unusual through them. A memory, a dream, the reflection of someone who had not yet arrived in your life. No one ever admitted this aloud, but everyone in Wizard City knew. The windows in that shop were special. And so the boy grew up surrounded by glass and light and glimpses of elsewhere. He learned to walk between leaning stacks of frames, learned to speak while pressing his palms against the cool, smooth surface of glass, and learned to listen to the creaks of the old floorboards, to the soft sigh of his mother, to the hush of the wind that sometimes rattled the shop's highest panes. But it was silence he loved most. Strange, isn't it, for a child to treasure silence? Children usually fill the world with laughter and shouts and questions that spill endlessly like marbles on a floor, but not this boy. He would sit by the highest window in the shop where dust turned golden in the sunlight, and he would close his eyes. His parents thought he was napping. Sometimes he was, but more often he was listening to something only he seemed to hear, the faint pulse of quiet, as if silence itself had a heartbeat. The city, too, seemed to notice him. Wizard City was not like other places. Its cobblestones shifted gently when they wanted to comfort tired feet. Its lanterns glowed a little warmer if someone walked alone at night. And though its secrets were many, it always revealed itself slowly, like a storyteller who knew the value of a pause. The boy, with his quiet love of silence, fit perfectly here. By the time he was 7, the neighbors whispered about him. Not in cruel tones. Wizard City was too soft for that, but in gentle curiosity. He never cries loudly. He can calm a fussy baby just by holding its hand. I swear when he smiles, the whole street sighs. And perhaps it was true, for he seemed to carry something unspoken with him, an ease, a softness, a reminder that not every power is about force. Some powers are about listening, about receiving, about making room for another. One evening, while the last rays of sun were sliding off the rooftops, he sat with his father outside the shop. They shared a simple dinner, bread still warm from the oven across the street, a wedge of cheese and an apple split into 4 pieces. His father, who rarely spoke much, leaned back against the doorframe and said, "Do you hear it?" The boy tilted his head. At first he thought his father meant the clatter of carts rolling home, or the soft chatter of neighbors, or the cry of a bird overhead. But then he caught it. A low, steady hum, not from any one place, but from everywhere. The city itself. Yes, he whispered. His father smiled. Not everyone can, not everyone. The boy didn't know what that meant then, but he remembered it always. The hum beneath the noise, the city's soft heart, the first whisper. As night deepened and lanterns flickered alive one by one, the boy pressed his palms together and felt warmth pool between them. He didn't understand it, he didn't try to. He only knew it was gentle, and that was enough. The world was still wide, and Wizard City had countless secrets waiting. But for now the boy sat quietly, breadcrumbs on his lap, apple juice sweet on his tongue, and silence gathering like a blanket around him. And if you had walked past just then, you might not have noticed anything remarkable. Just a child finishing supper, watching stars begin to appear. But if you lingered long enough, you might have felt it too, the soft, steady hum of a city that dreams, and a child who already belonged to its hidden history, and that, dear one, is where his story begins. The boy's life in those first years was not marked by the kinds of stories people carve into stone or sing in ballads. His life was softer, quieter, like the rings of a tree, growing invisibly, layer by layer, until one day you look back and realize how much has changed. And in Wizard City, change was never loud. It came in the hush of twilight, in the way a corner shop added one more lantern without anyone noticing, or in the way a street curved differently one morning, as if it had always been that way. The city was alive, yes, but in the manner of her dream that slowly rearranges itself when you are not paying attention. The boy, who still had no title and no fame, was simply known as the child from the window shop. He was curious, though not in the restless way other children often are. His curiosity was more like a listening, an openness to what the world wished to tell him. One afternoon, while wandering near the back of the shop, he found something peculiar. There was a pane of glass leaning against the wall, forgotten, gathering dust. It was unlike the others, not framed, not polished, just a clear, unshaped piece. He wiped it clean with his sleeve and peered into it. At first it reflected nothing but his small face, round cheeks, serious eyes, hair that fell in soft waves. But then, faintly, there was something more. A sound. It was strange, because glass should not make a sound on its own. And yet when he pressed his ear against it, he heard whispers, gentle ones, not frightening, not sharp. They reminded him of lullabies sung too softly to catch every word. He stayed there for a long time, cheek pressed against the cool surface, listening to voices he could not understand. They did not speak in his language, but in something older, rounder, more like the hush of wind or the roll of distant waves. When, he told his mother, she only smiled. The windows here have always carried echoes, she said, brushing dust from his hair. Perhaps you are simply ready to hear them. That night, he dreamed of standing inside a cradle made not of wood, but of sound. The whispers wrapped around him like blankets, carrying pieces of memory that weren't his. He felt both very small and very safe. In the days that followed, he began to notice more. The windows in the shop sometimes held after images, shadows, of people long gone or perhaps not yet arrived. A man carrying a birdcage, though no such man had passed. A child chasing a red ball, though the street outside was empty. His parents never questioned it. In Wizard City, you learned early that not everything needed explaining. Some things simply were. One evening, while his father fixed the latch of a stubborn window frame, the boy asked, "Why do the windows show these things?" His father paused, thoughtful, turning the metal latch in his hand. "Maybe because the city doesn't like forgetting," he said at last. "Maybe it holds echoes so we remember what matters. Or maybe—" he smiled faintly. "Maybe it's just the way the city dreams." The boy carried that answer quietly in his chest. He liked the thought of a dreaming city. It made the nights feel softer, as though the streets themselves were tucked under a great blanket, sighing in their sleep. It was around this time that he met the baker. The baker's shop sat just across the square, and every morning the scent of warm bread drifted through the window shop, weaving into the boy's earliest memories like threads of comfort. But it wasn't the bread alone that made the baker important. It was the baker's voice, deep, slow, kind, like a song that never hurried. The baker noticed the boy's quietness. Where other children came rushing in for rolls, laughing and spilling crumbs, this boy stood silently, hands folded, waiting. Instead of filling the silence with chatter, the baker matched it. He would simply place a roll in the boy's hands and smile as if to say, "I see you. You don't need to be loud to be heard." Over time, a small bond grew between them. The boy would help sweep flour from the floor or carry loaves to the counter. In return, the baker would share little pieces of wisdom, not like lectures but like breadcrumbs left along a path. "One roll is never just for one stomach," he once said, slicing bread into halves before handing it over. "It always tastes better when it's shared." Or another day while kneading dough, "Patience is a kind of magic. If you hurry bread, it collapses. If you hurry people, they do too." The boy listened to these words with the same attention he gave to the whispering windows, and in his heart both began to settle, the echoes of the city and the quiet lessons of the baker. One dusk, as lanterns shimmered to life, the baker placed a loaf into the boy's hands and said, "You're different. That's not a bad thing. This city needs listeners more than it needs shouters." The boy didn't fully understand, but the warmth of the loaf in his hands and the warmth in the baker's eyes was enough. From then on, he thought of the baker's shop as another kind of cradle, a place where kindness rose like dough, where silence was respected, where he could simply be himself, and always in the background, the city whispered. Through windows, through stones, through the hush of twilight, it was as if Wizard City had chosen him to hear its quieter truths. The cradle of echoes was not just a pane of glass in a dusty corner, it was the whole city, holding him in its unseen arms, teaching him that to grow was not always to rush forward. Sometimes to grow was to listen, to soften, to carry silence as a gift. And in that cradle, the boy began to dream not only for himself, but for the city that seemed to dream with him. The boy's days unfolded like the turning of pages, quietly, steadily, filled with details others might overlook. By now, the shop was as much a part of him as his own hands. The smell of wood polish, the soft scatter of sawdust, the glimmer of sunlight across glass. These were his constants, the ordinary wonders of his childhood. But there was something unusual about the windows that surrounded him. It began with small things, moments so subtle his parents barely noticed. Once, while dusting a tall pane that leaned against the wall, the boy paused. The glass, instead of reflecting his face, showed him the image of a garden he had never seen. Rows of silver-leaved plants shimmered beneath a night sky full of stars he didn't recognize. He blinked, rubbed his sleeve across the glass, but the vision remained for just a few breaths before fading back into a simple reflection. Another time, while helping his mother carry a stack of frames, he stopped in the street. The largest window in the pile caught the light, and for an instant, he swore he saw a figure walking toward him through it, a girl with hair like spilled ink, her arms filled with lanterns. When he turned around, the street was empty. When he looked again, the glass showed nothing but his own small frame and the sky behind him. These moments did not frighten him. They left him thoughtful, as though the city was offering him glimpses of stories too large to fit into one life. He began to think of the windows as portals, though not in the way of stepping through. They were more like invitations to imagine, to wonder, to listen to what might be possible. His parents never dismissed his discoveries. Wizard City was a place where strange things were as natural as rain. His mother only said, "Perhaps the glass remembers places you haven't been yet." And his father, polishing the edge of a new frame, murmured, "Perhaps it wants you to keep looking." So he did. Every afternoon, after chores, he would wander among the leaning stacks and press his face close to the glass. Sometimes he saw nothing unusual. Other times a window would hum faintly beneath his fingertips, or shimmer as if stirred by an unseen breeze. He learned not to chase these moments, but to receive them, like fireflies landing gently on an open palm. One evening, he sat by the largest display window at the front of the shop. Outside, lanterns flickered to life in the square, casting golden pools across the cobblestones. Inside the glass, however, something else appeared. A flock of birds, their wings trailing sparks, swept across the surface. They wheeled in silence, glowing softly, and then vanished as though swallowed by the dusk. The boy's chest tightened with awe. He whispered aloud, "Thank you," though he didn't know who he was thanking. That was the first night he began to speak to the windows, softly, like secrets to a friend. He asked them questions, not expecting answers, but enjoying the act of speaking into wonder. "Where do you come from? Do you dream like the city does? Why do you choose to show me?" Sometimes, when he leaned his head against the glass, he felt warmth spread through him, not the sharp heat of fire, but a gentler warmth like being wrapped in a blanket. He began to realize that the glass wasn't only showing him things, it was teaching him something quieter, that the world was larger than what eyes could prove, and that beauty was often a visitor, arriving only for those who waited with patience. The baker noticed the boy's new habit. One morning, as the boy entered the shop with a basket of rolls, the baker chuckled. "You've got that look again, the one that says your mind is somewhere else." The boy hesitated, then confessed, "Sometimes the windows show me things. Not like dreams, more like places I haven't been, people I don't know." The baker didn't laugh. He only set down his rolling pin and wiped flour from his hands. "That's a gift," he said simply. "Most people see only what is in front of them. But you're seeing what lies beneath. Don't run from it, listen to it." The boy held those words close. In the weeks that followed, his sense of wonder deepened. When other children ran through the streets shouting games, he found joy in sitting quietly before a pane of glass waiting. Sometimes the waiting stretched long, with nothing but his own reflection staring back. But now and then the glass would flicker and reveal something new. A moonlit tower, a field of wildflowers that swayed though there was no wind, or a hand reaching toward him as though from another time. There was one vision, however, that lingered, in his mind more than any other. It appeared in a window that leaned crookedly near the back of the shop. As he approached, the surface clouded, then cleared, revealing the image of a vast hall filled with lanterns. Hundreds of them, floating in the air like stars, gathered into a single room. The sight was so beautiful that his breath caught. He reached out, fingertips brushing the glass, and whispered, "Someday." For reasons he could not explain, he felt certain he would stand in that hall one day. It was not a desire. It was more like a promise whispered by the city itself. That night, lying in bed, he thought about how strange and wondrous his childhood had already become. The echoes in the glass, the warmth in silence, the wisdom of the baker, the soft hum of the city, these were not adventures in the way stories usually told them, but to him, they were treasures. As sleep began to draw its curtain, he realized something. His life was not about seeking power or fame or even answers. His life, he sensed, would be about noticing, about gathering quiet wonders the way others gathered coins or titles, and in Wizard City, where even the windows remembered. What others had forgotten, that was perhaps the greatest gift of all. Silence to most is an absence, an empty space between words, a pause too long at a dinner table, the weight that falls when laughter dies down. But to the boy, silence was never empty. It was a presence, alive, patient, watchful. And somewhere, along the winding path of his childhood, he realized he could hold it. Not control it, not command it, but gather it the way someone might cup water in their hands. It began without intention. One night, while sitting on the threshold of the window shop, he noticed how the street outside was unusually restless. A cart had broken its wheel, and neighbors had gathered, voices rising, frustrations spilling into the evening. He watched quietly, small and unnoticed. As his hands rested on his knees, he felt something curious. The noise seemed to draw inward, folding itself into him, until the air around him grew softer, calmer. The shouting dimmed, the neighbors' voices dropped. Within a few minutes, the argument had dwindled into muttering, then sighs, then laughter, as someone finally offered help with the broken wheel. The boy blinked, surprised. It was not that he had silenced them, it was more like he had gathered the sharpness of their noise and carried it away, leaving room for gentleness. After that evening, he began to notice it more often. When a baby cried in the baker's shop, he would take the child's hand and feel the noise soften like a storm retreating. When thunder rattled the windows one stormy night, he sat up in bed, pressed his palms together, and felt the thunder fade into a softer rumble, no longer frightening. He never bragged about this. It didn't feel like a power. It felt like listening, so deeply that the world itself responded by quieting. The baker was the first to notice. One late afternoon, the boy sat in the shop while the baker kneaded dough, the rhythmic push and fold filling the room. A customer entered, clearly upset, muttering complaints about neighbors, weather, the rising price of flour. The baker, patient as ever, nodded and said little, but the boy, sitting quietly in the corner, lowered his gaze and breathed slowly. The air shifted. The customer's voice softened, slowed, and by the time he left he was smiling faintly, a loaf of bread cradled under his arm. The baker chuckled, wiping his hands. "You have a way about you," he said to the boy. "Like a bowl that catches the spill, or a night sky that holds the noise of the world until it becomes starlight." The boy didn't quite understand, but the words stayed with him. At home his parents also began to notice. His mother, once flustered by the chaos of running the shop, found herself calmer when he was near. His father, whose temper sometimes sparked like struck flint, grew quieter in the boy's presence, as if reminded that gentleness was possible. It was not a power of command. It was not control. It was something subtler, a gift of listening so completely that silence itself gathered, filling the spaces where noise had once ruled. One night, sitting beneath the largest window of the shop, the boy experimented. He closed, his eyes cupped his hands together, and imagined silence flowing into them like water. To his wonder, he felt a soft weight there, not heavy but present, like holding a folded piece of cloth. He opened his hands, and the silence spread outward, rippling gently across the room. The creaks of the floor, the distant shouts of children, outside even the hum of the lantern, all dimmed, softened until he was wrapped in a cocoon of hush. It was not frightening. It was peaceful. It was as though he had made a blanket, not of fabric, but of listening. From that night on, he returned to this practice often. He would sit by the window, draw silence into his hands, and let it spread. Sometimes he kept it, close like a secret comfort. Other times he let it drift outward, calming the street, the square, even the restless birds that perched on the rooftops. But silence is not only comfort. It also carries memory. One evening, when he held silence in his hands, he heard something hidden within it, a faint echo, like a voice that was not his own. It was not words, but more like a sigh, a trace of someone who had once walked these streets long ago. He realized then that silence was not empty at all. It was full of echoes, of histories too soft to be spoken aloud. He began to wonder if Wizard City had given him this gift on purpose. Perhaps the city, with all its whispers and living streets, needed someone to carry its quiet stories, someone who could hold silence the way others held fire or song. The thought filled him with both awe and humility. He did not feel powerful. He felt responsible, like a lantern keeper, tending something fragile and glowing. In time, the neighbors grew used to his presence in a new way. If disputes arose, someone would say, "Bring the boy." Not because he would solve the problem, but because when he was there, people remembered how to breathe. Children who could not sleep found comfort when he sat beside their beds, holding silence until their dreams softened into slumber. Old men on benches found themselves speaking more kindly when he lingered nearby. Even animals seemed to trust him, birds perching on his shoulder as if drawn to the hush he carried. And yet he never sought attention. He never called it a gift. To him it was simply the way he lived, gathering silence, offering it back to the world, and walking quietly through the city's dreaming streets. One twilight, the baker said to him, "There are many kinds of wizards in this city. Some shape fire, some weave light, some bend metal or wind. But you are something rarer. You are a listener. And sometimes listening changes more than shouting ever could." The boy lowered his eyes, shy, but he smiled. For in his heart, he knew the baker was right. And so the boy became known, quietly, affectionately, as the one who gathered silence, not with ceremony, not with titles, but with the simple truth of his presence. And though his life was still only beginning, Wizard City itself seemed to sigh with relief, as though grateful for the child who carried its quiet heart. Childhood is a path we rarely notice while walking it. Only later, looking back, do we realize how soft the ground once was beneath our feet, how the air held the faint sweetness of beginnings. For the boy, those beginnings were stitched into the streets of Wizard City, and now the streets themselves began to beckon him further, into corners he had not yet explored. His parents trusted him more with each passing year. By now he was old enough to run errands alone, fetching wood polish, carrying messages, or returning a borrowed tool to a neighbor. At first his wanderings were small, no farther than the square or the baker's warm shop, but slowly, softly, his steps stretched further. The city seemed to guide him, not with signs or instructions, but with a pull, the way a lullaby draws you towards sleep without demanding it. Wizard City was unlike other cities. No two maps ever agreed, and no one truly minded. Streets curved differently on different days. Alleys opened where walls once stood. Lanterns changed color depending on who walked beneath them. To outsiders, it might have been confusing. But for those who belonged to the city, it was simply the way things were, like dreams rearranging themselves without asking permission. The boy learned early not to resist this shifting. Instead, he walked with openness, trusting that the streets would reveal what he needed. And often they did. One morning, while delivering a note for his father, he found himself on a road he had never seen before. The cobblestones here shimmered faintly, as if dusted with silver. The houses leaned at curious angles, their windows too tall, their chimneys bending as though listening to the sky. It was quiet, not the kind of silence that comes from absence, but the kind that feels alive, waiting. As he walked, he noticed a door painted a deep dark blue. It stood slightly ajar, though the house behind it seemed abandoned. For a moment he paused. Something in the air hummed, soft and low, like a note held just beneath hearing. He thought of stepping inside, but the city seemed to whisper, "Not yet." So he moved on, carrying the hum with him like a secret. Another time his wandering led him to a narrow bridge arched over a stream. The water below was so clear he could see not just stones, but faces. They were not frightening faces, only gentle ones, smiling, sighing, some old, some young. He leaned over the railing, mesmerized. A woman's face rose from the current and whispered his name. He stepped back, startled, though her voice was kind. By the time he looked again, the water showed nothing but rippling sunlight. The boy learned something then. Wizard City was full of roads that led not only to places but to encounters, with echoes, with whispers, with pieces of memory that belonged as much to the city as to its people. On evenings when chores were finished, he began to wander on purpose, not far enough to worry his parents, but far enough to let the city surprise him. He would tuck a small loaf from the baker into his satchel, step into the twilight, and let his feet decide the way. Sometimes he discovered tiny courtyards where musicians played to no audience but the moon. Other times he found staircases that led nowhere, yet the climb filled him with an unexplainable calm. Once he stumbled into a square filled with cages, each one empty except for a single feather that glowed faintly in the dark. He stayed there a long time, listening to the faint rustle of wings he could not see. The city did not overwhelm him. Its strangeness was never loud, never meant to dazzle. It was gentle, patient, as if offering him small gifts to pocket in his memory. He began to keep a notebook. Not one of words, he was still too young to write much, but of sketches. Crooked houses, staircases that bent, bridges that whispered, lanterns that flickered in shapes of stars. Each page became a quiet map of his own growing wonder. One evening, as he returned from a wandering, his father looked at the drawings. He traced a finger over the crooked lines and said, "These are good, but more than good. They're yours." The city shows itself differently to everyone. What you've seen, perhaps no one else has. Remember that. The boy thought about this as he lay in bed. If the city revealed itself uniquely to him, then perhaps it was speaking to him in a language Only he could hear. A private lullaby, a soft conversation that unfolded each time he walked its roads. And though he did not yet know it, these wanderings would shape his life. For in every strange corner, in every shimmer of glass or whisper of water, the city was slowly weaving him into its history. He was not just a child in a window shop anymore. He was becoming part of Wizard City's dream, one quiet step at a time. That night, as he drifted into sleep, he remembered the blue door, the faces in the stream, the feathers glowing in their cages. He felt the silence he had gathered still, resting gently in his palms. And just before dreams claimed him, he whispered to himself, "I will keep walking. I will keep listening." The city outside his window seemed to sigh in reply. There are places in every city that appear ordinary until one looks too closely. Wizard City was full of such places, but one in particular waited for the boy like a secret that would not stay hidden forever. He first came upon it in the way he often did, by walking without planning, letting his feet listen to whispers the rest of him could not hear. It was a late afternoon. The sky painted in soft oranges that melted into deep purples. The air was thick with the smell of bread cooling, lanterns flickering awake one by one. He had turned down an alley so narrow that his shoulders brushed the walls when suddenly the space opened, revealing a courtyard he had never noticed before. At its center stood a building so tall it seemed to bend the twilight. Its walls were plain stone, but the stone shimmered faintly, as though it remembered rain long after it had dried. There were no windows, no signs, and most curiously, no doors. Just walls rising quiet and steady into the sky. The boy stopped and stared. A building without a way in felt like a puzzle. Yet he felt no urgency, no frustration, only a soft curiosity, like the pull of a lullaby that asks you to lean closer. He circled the structure slowly, hand trailing along the cool stone. Around him the courtyard held its breath. Birds were silent, the air was still. Then, as he completed his circle, he noticed something impossible. Where he had begun, there now stood an archway. It hadn't been there before. The arch was simple, a curve of stone with no ornament. Beyond it, shadows deepened into a long hall. He glanced around, half expecting someone to stop him, but the courtyard remained empty. With the kind of trust he had learned from his wanderings, he stepped inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, silence deepened. The world outside faded to a distant hum. Inside, the air carried the scent of parchment, ink, and something older, like rain pressed into the pages of a forgotten book. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched before him, each one towering high, filled with books, scrolls, and fragments bound in materials he could not name. Some bindings seemed woven from light itself, others stitched from shadows. Yet the place did not feel heavy. It felt alive, as though the shelves themselves were breathing softly in their sleep. No lanterns burned, but the hall was not dark. Each book gave off a faint glow, enough to paint the shelves in gentle shades. He reached for one nearest to him. The cover shimmered like water, cool beneath his fingertips. When he opened it, he found not words, but an image, a river flowing across the page, its waters moving as though alive. He leaned close, hearing faint laughter in the current, as if the river carried voices from far away. Startled but not afraid, he closed the book. Immediately the sound faded. He placed it back carefully, almost reverently, and whispered a thank you, unsure why. Deeper he wandered. Some books whispered when he passed. Others sighed, some chuckled softly as if remembering. He felt no sense of being watched, but rather of being welcomed gently by something vast and kind. At one shelf he found a small volume bound in thread as thin as spider silk. Inside a single phrase appeared, written in a hand so delicate it seemed it might vanish if stared at too long. Every step you take becomes a story. He closed the book with trembling hands. The words pressed into him like warmth, like truth. In another row he discovered scrolls tied with ribbons that smelled faintly of cinnamon. Unrolling one, he saw only sketches of clouds, soft, drifting, endless. Yet as he watched, the clouds moved, curling into shapes of faces, animals, songs without sound. He smiled, not trying to understand, only letting it be. It was then he realized this was no ordinary library. These books did not contain words alone. They held moments, fragments, memories of the city itself. It was as if Wizard City had written down its dreams and placed them here, safe, waiting for whoever might listen. He lingered, turning pages slowly, each one offering a glimpse of something he could not have found elsewhere. One book showed the first lantern ever lit in the city, glowing against endless night. Another revealed the laughter of children long grown, their echoes still warm within the binding. Another whispered a lullaby in a language he didn't know, yet somehow understood. Hours might have passed, or only minutes. Time in the library did not move the way it did outside, but eventually he felt a soft tug, a reminder that he could not stay forever. His hand brushed the shelf one last time, a silent promise to return. When he stepped back toward the archway, the hall behind him seemed to sigh, like a mother tucking a child into bed. Outside, the courtyard welcomed him again, though the arch had already vanished. The building stood seamless, whole, as if nothing had happened. But the boy knew better. He had found a place not meant for everyone, a place that opened only when the city chose. A library without doors, filled with the dreams of ages. That night, lying in bed, he held the memory close. He did not tell his parents, not yet. Some secrets felt too delicate to share, too precious to risk misunderstanding. Instead, he whispered to himself, "Every step becomes a story," and drifted into sleep with the echo of books breathing softly in his mind. And somewhere in the shifting streets of Wizard City, the library waited. Lantern light was nothing unusual in Wizard City. Every street, every balcony, every shopfront carried its glow in some form. Yet for the boy, lanterns became more than a way to see through the dark. They became voices, soft, steady, always near. It began one evening when he lingered longer than usual after a wandering. The streets were nearly empty, the baker's shutters drawn, the stone paths cooling under the touch of night. He stopped at the corner where 3 lanterns hung together on a crooked iron post. Their light was not steady, but gently pulsing. One, glowing brighter, then dimmer, as if breathing. At first he thought it was a trick of his eyes, but then he noticed a pattern. One lantern glowed in 3 slow beats, another answered with 2, and the third flickered in between as if filling in the silence. He stood still, holding his breath. The lanterns were speaking, not in words exactly, but in rhythm, in pauses, in brightness and dimness. It was a language of light. Curious, he raised his hand toward the nearest one. The lantern pulsed once, gently, like a heartbeat. He smiled without meaning to. In return, he tapped the post softly with his fingers, once, twice, 3 times. The lantern answered with a glow of the same rhythm. And so, for the first time, he spoke with light. From then on, he began to notice them everywhere. Some lanterns only hummed faintly, content to shine without conversation. Others seemed eager to chatter, flickering in playful bursts when he passed. A few, he sensed, were solemn, glowing steady, offering reassurance more than words. One lantern, near the Bridge of Faces, seemed especially fond of him. It would brighten whenever he approached, casting ripples across the water below. Sometimes it flickered like laughter, sometimes it burned with a steady calm, like a guardian watching over him. The boy began to greet it each evening with a tap of his foot or a nod, and it always answered in light. He wondered what they were saying. Were they simply mirroring him, or were they sharing something deeper, something carried in brightness that words could never hold? One night, unable to resist, he whispered aloud to the lantern near his home, "What do you want me to know?" The lantern swayed gently in the breeze, though there was no wind. Its glow softened, dimmed, then brightened again, slow and deliberate. Though no voice reached his ears, he felt an answer inside his chest. Keep looking. Keep listening. The message was simple, but it filled him with warmth. From then on, lanterns became part of his secret education. He learned to tell the difference between a playful flicker and a thoughtful pause. He began to keep small rhythms in his pocket, tapping them out with pebbles or fingertips, waiting to see which lanterns would reply. The city itself seemed to encourage him, weaving his evenings with small encounters of light. Sometimes, while sketching, he would draw not, Just the crooked streets and shifting bridges, but lanterns pulsing like stars strung low to the earth. He began to imagine the whole city as one great constellation, its lanterns connected in a web of shining voices. His parents noticed his growing fascination. One night, his mother smiled as she saw him tapping at the windowsill, waiting for the lantern outside to flicker in reply. "You're listening to the city again," she said softly. "Yes," he answered. "It has so much to say," and she did not laugh. She only kissed the top of his head and whispered, "Then keep listening." The boy began to carry his sketchbook on every walk. By now, its pages held crooked houses, bridges with faces, glowing, feathers and shelves of imagined books. But in the margins, he filled rows of dots and lines, lantern rhythms, captured like musical notes. One evening, while crossing the market square, he paused at a cluster of lanterns that flickered faster than usual. They seemed excited, restless. He tapped back, uncertain. The lanterns brightened all at once, bathing him in a sudden glow. Startled, he looked around and saw a child wandering at the far end of the square, alone, searching for her mother. He hurried to her side, holding out his hand. "Come," he said gently. "Let's find her together." Soon her mother came, rushing, relief spilling in her voice. As they embraced, the boy glanced back at the lanterns. They pulsed once, twice, then steadied, as though nodding. He understood. The lanterns did not only whisper to him, they guided him too. That night, lying in bed, he thought of how strange and wonderful it was that light could carry care, that flickers could become guardians, that something as ordinary as a lantern could become extraordinary if only one paid attention. He closed his eyes and whispered to the darkness, "Thank you." Outside, a lantern by his window answered with a soft, steady glow, as if to say, "We're always here." And in that light, his dreams unfolded like lanterns floating down a river, guiding him deeper into the quiet night. The river was never still in Wizard City. Even on windless days, its waters rippled with unseen motion, carrying reflections that never quite matched the world above. The boy often found himself drawn there, leaning over its bridges, staring into its depths, wondering whether the faces he glimpsed were echoes of the past or dreams of the future. One quiet afternoon, while the city dozed under the warmth of late sunlight, he wandered back to the river's edge. The lanterns had guided him there, flickering faintly as though nudging his steps towards something waiting. He did not question their guidance. By now, he had learned to trust. The river ran wide and slow, its surface painted with drifting clouds. A low wall curved along the bank, where ivy dangled in long green ribbons, and there, sitting cross-legged on the stone, was a girl about his age. She wore a coat too big for her, sleeves rolled until her hands peeked out like shy birds. Her hair caught the sunlight in uneven strands, and she was humming, softly, a tune that seemed older than she was. The boy slowed his steps, not wanting to disturb her. But the girl turned her head as if she had been waiting for him. Her eyes met his, clear, steady, curious. "You hear them too, don't you?" she asked. He blinked. "Hear what?" "The river," she said, as if it were obvious. "The voices beneath the water. Most people think it's just the sound of the current. But it isn't." The boy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I've heard them," he admitted. "Faces, too, they whisper sometimes." Her smile was small but certain, like someone who had just been proven right. "I knew it," she said. "You're not like the others." She patted the stone beside. "Her?" The boy sat down, the river stretching before them like a page waiting to be read. For a while they were quiet together. The girl hummed again, and the boy thought he could almost hear the water hum with her. Then she pointed to a place where the current bent around a cluster of reeds. "That's where they come up the clearest," she said. "If you listen, really listen, you'll hear their names." He leaned closer, heart steady, ears straining. At first there was only water's song, but slowly, gently, other sounds surfaced, whispers, syllables, like names half forgotten, but still alive. He shivered, though not from fear. "Who are they?" he asked softly. "The ones who lived here before," the girl answered. "The river keeps them. Every laugh, every sorrow, every step across the bridges, it all sinks into the current. They aren't gone, just carried. The boy thought of the library without doors, where books had breathed with memories. This felt the same. Wizard, city did not lose its people. It held them tenderly in shelves, in rivers, in lantern light. He looked at her again. How do you know so much? She shrugged, tugging at her oversized sleeve. I come here often. My father says it's foolish that I'm imagining things, but I know what I hear, and now so do you. Her certainty warmed him. Until then, his wanderings had felt like secrets he carried alone. Now, sitting by the river with this girl, he realized he was not the only one listening to the city's hidden voice. They stayed until the light faded, until the lanterns along the bank awoke with soft glows. As the sky deepened, the girl stood. I should go, she said, but I'll be here tomorrow. Come again? The boy nodded without hesitation. Yes, and so began their companionship. Each day after chores, he would find her at the river. Sometimes they listened together in silence, heads bent toward the water's whispers. Sometimes they traded stories, small ones like how the baker once gave him bread too warm to hold, or how she had seen a cat leap across rooftops as if it had wings. They laughed, they wondered, they learned. Slowly the boy felt his city grow, larger, not because its streets shifted, but because he now shared them. The strange corners no longer belonged only to him. When he drew sketches of crooked alleys, he began leaving space for her figure beside his own. When lanterns pulsed in rhythm, he taught her to tap replies, and her laughter joined the city's flickers. One evening the girl asked him, "Do you think the river remembers us too, even now, while we're still alive?" He considered, watching, the water curl around stones. "Yes," he said finally, "I think it remembers everything." Her eyes softened. "Then promise me this. When we're older, if the river ever carries our names, we'll make sure they're names worth keeping." The boy did not fully understand, but he nodded. "I promise." And in that moment, a bond formed between them, woven as gently as ivy over stone. Not loud, not dramatic, but certain, the kind of bond that lingers long after lanterns dim, after rivers flow on, after the years fold quietly upon themselves. That night, as he drifted into dreams, he thought of the girl's voice blending with the hum of the river, and he felt for the first time that his story was not only his own. The girl by the river became a part of his days, as natural as the rising lanterns at dusk. Together, the boy and the girl wandered Wizard City, not as strangers passing through, but as listeners, as seekers, as children who knew the city breathed, more than stone and smoke. One afternoon, after the market stalls had folded shut and the air carried the faint hush that follows busy hours, the girl tugged at his sleeve. "Come," she said, "there's a place I want to try. I've never gone alone." They walked side by side through streets that bent gently toward twilight. Lanterns had not yet lit, and the sky above held that brief, fragile light between day and night. The city seemed to be waiting, watching. The girl led him down an alley so narrow they had to walk single file. Its walls leaned close, painted with moss and faint chalk marks where children had once played. At the far end stood a wooden gate, worn smooth as if many hands had tried it before. But when the boy pushed, it did not budge. "It's locked," he said softly. The girl shook her head. "Not locked, just listening." She closed her eyes, hands resting on the gate. For a long moment she stood in silence, breathing slow. The boy copied her, placing his palm against the wood. Together they waited. At last the gate gave a low sigh. It swung open, revealing not another street, but a garden hidden between the city's bones. It was unlike any garden they had ever seen. No birds sang here, no fountains trickled, yet flowers bloomed in stillness, pale blossoms that opened without moving, petals curved like frozen moonlight. Trees stood with branches, arched in hushed grace, their leaves unmoving though no roof covered the sky. Even the air felt softened, thick with silence that was not empty but full, like the pause before a lullaby begins. They stepped inside, and the gate closed quietly behind them. The boy looked around with wide eyes. "It feels like—" He trailed, off unsure of the word. "Like the city is holding its breath," the girl whispered. They walked slowly along a path of smooth stones. Each step seemed to echo gently, though no sound left their feet. The flowers leaned slightly toward them, as though aware of their presence. In the center of the garden stood a pond, so still it looked like glass. When they peered into it, they did not see their reflections. Instead, they saw moments, small ones, ordinary ones. The boy saw himself at the bakery window, face lit with longing. He saw his father mending a chair, patient hands steady. He saw his mother humming while folding linens. The girl gasped beside him, for in the water she saw herself walking barefoot through the river reeds, laughing though she could not remember when. "It shows us," she murmured, "not the grand things, the quiet things." They sat by the pond, letting the garden wrap around them. Here even their own voices felt like intrusions, so they spoke less and listened more. The silence was not empty. It was rich, layered, alive. It carried the weight of everything the city chose not to say aloud. The boy thought of the lanterns' flickers, the library's whispers, the river's hum. This silence was different. It was not speaking. It was holding, as if all the unspoken. Dreams of Wizard City gathered here, blooming in stillness, waiting for those who would notice. After a while, the girl reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small pebble. Without a word, she dropped it into the pond. Ripples spread across the surface, carrying their reflections outward. For a moment, the silent flowers swayed, as if stirred by invisible wind. She smiled. "Now it remembers us, too," the boy felt, a warmth in his chest, though no sound accompanied it. He understood. In this garden, memory did not need to be written or whispered. It simply lingered, held forever in stillness. When the sun dipped lower, they rose reluctantly. The garden seemed to glow faintly now, the blossoms silvering in the dusk. As they turned to leave, the boy felt the urge to bow his head, to thank the silence itself. He did so without speaking, only placing his hand over his heart. The girl mirrored him. The gate opened as gently as it had closed, letting them slip back into the living noise of the city. Children laughed in the distance, vendors called out last prices, lanterns flickered awake one by one. Yet inside them, both, the hush of the silent garden lingered like a secret heartbeat. That night, as the boy drifted into dreams, he thought of how the city held not only voices but silences too, and he realized sometimes silence speaks loudest of all. The boy and the girl had grown used to wandering together, their footsteps weaving through Wizard City's shifting streets, as if the city itself welcomed their companionship. Yet even in a place of such strangeness, there were moments that felt more than unusual, moments that carried a quiet weight, as though they had been waiting for them all along. It was in the square near the glassblower's shop that they first noticed him. A man seated on a low wooden stool, bent over a stack of paper. His clothes were plain, though his coat seemed patched with fabric that shimmered faintly, like starlight stitched into worn cloth. His hair was white, not the white of age exactly, but the white of smoke rising from a chimney. On his lap lay sheets of paper, and with slow, careful movements he folded them into birds. His hands worked gently, not rushing, as though each crease carried meaning. When he finished one, he held it to his lips, breathed upon it, and released it into the air. To the boy and the girl's astonishment, the paper bird fluttered its wings and rose, not with the noise of feathers, but with the hush of drifting leaves. It circled once above the man's head, then flew off into the city, its delicate form vanishing into the twilight. The boy's eyes widened. The girl clutched his arm. Neither spoke, afraid their voices might break the spell. The man folded another. Again he breathed softly onto the paper, and again the bird came alive, wings whispering, carrying itself away as though it had always known how to fly. At last, the man lifted his head and looked directly at them. His eyes were gentle, deep as wells that reflected more sky than they held. "You've been listening," he said, voice low, warm. "That is good. The city loves listeners." The children exchanged glances, then stepped closer. "What are they?" the girl asked, nodding to the birds that had already flown. "Messages," the man said simply. Each bird carries something the city once remembered: a laugh, a sigh, a promise, a dream. Paper is patient, you see. It holds what others forget. The boy thought of his sketchbook, of the crooked lines and lantern rhythms he had captured. He nodded slowly. The man held out a fresh sheet of paper to him. "Here, try." With trembling hands, the boy accepted it. He had folded small shapes before, boats, hats, but never with such care. He followed the man's guidance. Fold once, fold twice, shape the wings, press the beak. The paper seemed to soften under his touch, eager to become what it was meant to be. When he finished, the man smiled. "Now breathe." The boy lifted the bird to his lips and exhaled gently. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the bird quivered, stretched its thin wings, and rose from his hands. It circled above him, glowing faintly in the dim air, before drifting away into the streets. A laugh of wonder escaped his throat. The girl was next. Her hands worked more quickly, folds sharp and sure. She breathed into her creation, and the bird leapt from her palms with surprising strength, flying higher than the others before vanishing into the clouds. The man watched them with quiet satisfaction. "Good," he murmured. "The city has chosen you." "What do you mean?" the boy asked. "Not everyone sees the faces in the river. Not everyone hears the lanterns. Not everyone notices the silence blooming in a hidden garden. But you notice. That is rare." His words settled over them like a blanket, not heavy but comforting. The boy felt a warmth he could not explain, as though the man were not only speaking of them, but of something much larger, the way certain hearts are tuned to hear what others cannot. The man returned to folding, hands moving slowly, tenderly. "One day," he said without looking up, "these birds will find their way back to you, carrying the memories you gave them, carrying what you've forgotten. Until then, let them fly." The children sat with him until the lanterns lit, watching bird after bird rise and vanish into the city's night. Each one left a hush in its wake, like a soft promise. At last, the man gathered his papers, tucking them into his shimmering coat. He rose, bowed slightly, and said, "Keep your ears open and your hands gentle. The city has much yet to show you." And with that, he walked away, disappearing down a side street that seemed to fold behind him. The boy and the girl sat in silence for a long time, the night deepening around them. At last, the girl whispered, "Do you think we'll see him again?" The boy thought of the glowing birds, of the man's eyes that seemed older than stone yet lighter than air. He shook his head softly. "I don't know, but I think we'll see the birds." And as they rose to leave, a single paper feather drifted down from the dark, glowing faintly before landing in the boy's hand. He held it close, heart steady, and together they walked home. That night, when sleep claimed him, he dreamed of countless paper birds circling the city like stars, carrying whispers, carrying light, carrying pieces of the hidden history only. He and the girl had begun to understand. The morning after the paper birds, Wizard City felt softer, as if the very streets remembered what had been seen. The boy carried the feather he had found, tucked carefully inside his sketchbook. Every so often he touched it, half afraid it might vanish, half certain it would not. The girl walked beside him with steady steps, her eyes scanning the windows, the rooftops, the pale blue sky above. She did not say it aloud, but she, too, was searching, listening for the hush of wings. Their wandering led them again to the glass-blower's shop. It sat in a crooked lane, sunlight pouring through its windows in gold sheets, spilling color across the cobbles. Even from outside, they could feel warmth radiating from within, the gentle breath of fire shaping fragile things. When they pushed, "Open the door," a bell chimed, not with a ring, but with a long musical note as though struck on crystal. Inside, the air shimmered with the smell of warm sand and smoke. The shelves were crowded with glass creations, vases as thin as raindrops, animals so small their eyes glittered like dew, globes that seemed to hold swirls of frozen clouds. The glassblower himself stood at the furnace, back bent, hands steady, as he turned a long rod. At the end of it glowed a molten shape, red gold, alive with heat. His breath, slow and measured, gave form to the glowing glass. The children watched in silence. His movements had a rhythm, not hurried, not idle, but like the breathing of the city itself. At last he set the piece aside to cool and turned toward them. His face was lined but not with weariness. His eyes gleamed like river stones. "You've come to hear them, haven't you?" he said. The boy and girl exchanged a glance. "The glass," the man explained, "remembers what fire cannot keep. Every piece holds an echo waiting for someone to listen." He reached for a globe the size of a lantern. Its surface shimmered faintly, as though mist curled inside it. He held it to his ear, closed his eyes and smiled. "Try," he whispered, passing it to the boy. The boy lifted it carefully, holding it as though it might dissolve into air. He pressed it to his ear. At first he heard nothing, only the faint hush of his own breath. But then, very softly, like distant bells, he heard laughter. Not loud, not sharp, but a warm, quiet laughter, like the sound of friends sharing secrets by candlelight. He pulled the globe away, startled, then held it again. The laughter was still there, faint but steady, echoing as though the glass had caught it long ago and never let it go. The girl leaned closer. "What does it say?" "It doesn't say anything," the boy murmured. "It's just happy." The girl's eyes softened. She reached for a smaller glass piece, shaped like a teardrop. She pressed it against her ear, and her breath caught. "What is it?" the boy asked. Her voice was hushed, reverent. It's singing like someone humming to a child." The glassblower nodded, his hands folded behind his back. "The city's memories are fragile things, too fragile for books, too fleeting for stone, so they hide here in the delicate breath of glass. They wait for gentle listeners." The children moved from shelf to shelf, pressing pieces of glass to their ears. Each held something different. A soft rain, a whispered promise, the sound of someone sighing before sleep. None of them were loud, none urgent, only fragments of quiet lives preserved like butterflies in crystal. The boy lingered over a globe no bigger than his palm. When he listened, he heard silence. At first he thought it empty, but the longer he held it, the more he realized the silence itself was the memory. Not loneliness, not absence, simply the peace of someone sitting very still, waiting for nothing, content with stillness. He lowered the globe slowly, heart heavy with wonder. The glassblower watched them both. "Some say Wizard City grows because of these echoes, that its streets curve to follow laughter, that its towers rise to hold sighs. Every echo helps the city breathe." The girl tilted her head. "Do you make them, or do you just find them?" The man's smile deepened, lines of light etching his face. "Both. Fire makes the form, but the city fills it. My breath shapes the glass, but the echoes are not mine. They belong to the city, and to those who notice." The boy thought of the paper birds, of how they had carried away unseen whispers. He thought of the river's shifting faces, the lanterns that hummed. All of it seemed connected, as though Wizard City itself were a vast, gentle keeper of memories, waiting for those who would pay attention. The man placed a small glass bird into the boy's hands. It was clear, delicate, wings arched mid-flight. "For you," he said. "It already carries an echo, though you may not hear it yet." The girl received a glass star, 5 points sharp as petals. "And for you," the man murmured, "hold it to the sky when you are ready, and it will answer." The children thanked him softly, tucking their treasures away. The warmth of the shop lingered on their skin, like sunlight long after the fire had gone. When they stepped outside, the city's air felt clearer, as if the echoes had tuned their hearts to listen more carefully. The boy carried the glass bird close, imagining it beating its invisible wings. The girl held the star against her chest, wondering what it would say when she asked. As they walked home, the boy whispered, "Do you think the city remembers?" "Us too." The girl looked at him, eyes bright. "Maybe we're already inside its glass." And the thought followed them into the twilight, soft and steady, like the hum of the city itself. That night, the boy dreamed of holding a glass globe, the size of the sky, pressing it to his ear, and hearing not echoes of others, but the sound of his own heart, gentle, steady, alive. The boy and the girl had walked many streets of Wizard City, but some paths seemed to appear only when the heart was quiet enough to notice. That evening their steps slowed, their voices hushed. It was then that a narrow passage opened before them, a lane they had never seen. Though it curved so gently it felt as if it had always been waiting. They followed it, and the air changed. The sounds of the city, the hum of lanterns, the rhythm of footsteps, the distant music of fountains, faded little by little until there was almost nothing. At the end of the passage they found an old wooden gate. Vines had crept over it, leaves shaped like stars, blossoms pale as moonlight. The girl pushed gently, and the gate swung inward without a sound. What lay beyond was a garden. It was not large, yet it seemed endless in its stillness. Stone paths wound through clusters of pale flowers that swayed without a breeze. Trees arched overhead, their branches heavy with silver leaves that caught no rustle, no whisper. At the center stood a fountain, but its water flowed without noise, as if even liquid had chosen silence. The children stepped inside, and at once they felt it, the weight, the hush, the serenity that was not emptiness but presence. Silence itself seemed to grow here, rooted deep in the soil like an ancient tree. The boy exhaled and realized he had not noticed the sound of his own breath until it was gone. The girl placed her hand on his arm, eyes wide. Words felt too loud. To try so they spoke only with glances, with small nods, with the rhythm of their footsteps together. They wandered slowly. Each step seemed to deepen the hush, until even the thoughts inside their heads grew softer. The boy realized that the city's usual murmurs, the lanterns, the faces in the river, the hidden laughter, had been replaced here by something gentler. Still, it was not absence. It was a kind of listening. They came to the fountain at the center. Its surface glimmered with silver light, though no sun nor lantern shone upon it. The water fell in perfect arcs, yet no drop made a sound. The girl knelt and dipped her hand into the pool. Ripples spread outward, and though they moved, they too made no sound at all. When she withdrew her hand, the ripples continued longer than they should have, circling, circling, until they became faint rings of light rather than water. Slowly, they faded into the stillness. The boy touched the fountain's stone. It was cool, and in that coolness he felt something like a memory, though not his own. It was the memory of a pause, of someone long ago setting down their burdens and resting here in peace. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he felt as though the silence itself were welcoming him, wrapping him in invisible arms. The girl's gaze lifted to the trees. She noticed that among the branches hung shapes like fruit, but softer, glowing faintly. She reached up and touched one, and when her fingers brushed it, she heard something, not with her ears, but inside her heart. It was her own laughter. A memory from long ago, the sound of herself as a very small child, running barefoot through summer grass. The sound was tender, far away, yet undeniably hers. She let go of the glowing fruit, and the sound faded back into silence. Her eyes filled, but not with sadness. She turned to the boy and gestured for him to try. He reached for another, brushing his fingertips against its pale glow. A hush filled him, and then he heard his mother's voice, humming as she once tucked him to bed. The sound was soft, frayed at the edges by time, but whole enough to hold him steady. His chest tightened, but with warmth rather than ache. The children looked at one another. They did not need words. Both understood. This garden did not hold laughter or sighs for everyone. It held silence, yes, but within that silence, pieces of one's own heart returned. The city gave its echoes to glass, its whispers to birds, but here, in this hidden courtyard, it gave back what had been lost within the listener. They lingered until the sky above the trees deepened into indigo. Stars appeared one by one, and the silver leaves caught their glow. The children lay down on the soft grass side by side, not speaking, not moving. They listened, and in the silence they felt closer to themselves and to each other than they had ever known. When they finally rose, they found the gate waiting for them, vines parted, ready to let them go. They stepped out into the cities, night, and at once the hum of lanterns and the faint music of fountains returned, but both noticed that the sounds seemed quieter now, softened. as though the silence of the garden still lingered inside them. As they walked home, the boy whispered very softly, "I think the silence is what makes the rest of it beautiful." The girl smiled faintly, her voice no louder than a breath. "Yes. It's like the city has a heartbeat, and the silence is the pause between." They carried the hush with them into sleep that night. And when the boy dreamed, he dreamed of a vast garden stretching across the stars, where every silence grew into light. The children had begun to notice that Wizard City never revealed its secrets all at once. It whispered them in pieces, through rivers, lanterns, glass, and gardens, each fragment a quiet gift. And now their wandering feet carried them toward a narrow street, where the air ticked faintly, as if unseen gears turned above them. At the end of the lane stood a crooked little shop with a sign shaped like a pocket watch. Its windows were dim, though hundreds of clocks hung inside, tall, small, round, square, some with faces painted like suns, others like moons. None of them matched, yet all ticked together, weaving a steady pulse. The boy pushed the door open, and the sound of ticking wrapped around them like a heartbeat multiplied. It was not loud, rather it was soft, insistent, like rain falling. Gently on many rooftops at once. Behind the counter sat the clockmaker. He was thin and bent, with hair dark as soot and spectacles perched low on his nose. His fingers moved endlessly, adjusting gears, winding keys, oiling cogs. Yet his face was serene, as if he had been waiting centuries for someone to enter. "Ah," he said, voice low and measured, "the listeners have arrived." The children froze. The girl tilted her head. "How do you know us?" The man smiled faintly, not looking up from his work. "The city told me. It always tells me who listens." "And you have been listening well." He gestured for them to come closer. On his workbench lay an unfinished clock. Its face was blank, its hands still. Yet its case shimmered faintly, as though holding more than brass and glass. "This one," the clockmaker said softly, "does not keep time in hours or minutes. It keeps shadows." The boy frowned gently. "Shadows?" "Yes," the man replied. "Not the kind that fall on walls, but the kind that fall on hearts. Regrets, pauses, hesitations, all the shadows we carry. This clock remembers them." He lifted the clock to his ear, listening with eyes closed. "There are shadows in every life. Most people hurry past them, but they leave their mark. The city collects them, and I keep them safe." He placed the clock gently in the boy's hands. "Listen," the boy pressed it to his ear. At first he expected a tick, but what he heard instead was a soft sigh, like someone sitting down after a long walk. Then another sound, the faint rustle of a page turned, followed by silence. It was not frightening, only still, like a memory. Left in twilight, he lowered the clock, unsettled yet strangely calm. "It sounds tired." The girl took it next. When she held it to her ear, she heard something different. A pause, then a faint laugh cut short, as though someone had wanted to speak but never did. The sound lingered in her chest, heavy but tender. The clockmaker nodded. "Every shadow has its sound. They are not meant to weigh you down, but to remind you that even pauses, even absences, shape who we are." He set the shadow clock aside and brought down another from the shelf, a tall one shaped like a tower. Its pendulum swung with a soft glow. "This one does not measure hours either," he said. "It measures waiting. Every moment someone has ever waited, for a friend, for a letter, for a door to open, it ticks here." The children listened. Within its steady beat, they heard footsteps pacing, breath held, fingers tapping. Yet strangely it did not feel impatient. It felt patient, like a river flowing at its own pace. The boy whispered, "So, time isn't just numbers." The man looked at him with kind eyes. "Time is the rhythm of living. The shadows, the waiting, the laughter, the silences, they are all pieces of its song." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And shadows are not always sorrow. They give light its shape. Without them, we would never notice the glow." The girl thought of the garden, of silence, of the glass echoes, of the paper birds. She understood then that Wizard City was not only preserving memories of joy, but also holding the quiet spaces between, those places most people overlooked. The clockmaker handed them each a small gift. To the boy, a pocket watch with no numbers, only a single hand that moved when he was thoughtful. To the girl, a locket clock shaped like a star, its ticking faint as a heartbeat, reminding her of every pause that mattered. "Keep these," he said. "They will not tell you the time. They will tell you when to listen." The children thanked him in whispers. As they stepped outside, the ticking of the clocks faded behind them, replaced once more by the murmurs of the city. The boy held his pocket watch close, watching the hand shift ever so slightly as he walked. The girl touched the locket at her neck, feeling its heartbeat tick softly against her skin. They walked in silence, each hearing a rhythm deeper than footsteps, slower than breath. And that night, as sleep gathered, the boy dreamed of shadows stretching not as darkness, but as soft outlines, gentle frames holding the light in place. The children had begun to carry the city with them, paper feathers, glass stars, clocks that ticked with shadows. Each gift was not only an object, but a reminder. Wizard City seemed to place pieces of itself in their hands, as though trusting them to remember what others had let slip away. One evening, their wandering led them to a narrow archway draped with strands of cloth that shimmered faintly in the dusk. The cloth looked ordinary at first, woven linen, wool, and silk. But when the boy brushed his fingers against one, he felt a pulse, like a heartbeat. The girl touched another, and in that moment, she heard a whisper. Not words exactly, but the faint syllable of a name she did not know, and yet it stirred something inside her, like a forgotten dream. They stepped through the archway and found themselves in a workshop glowing with soft lamplight. Looms stood against the walls, their wooden frames worn smooth by years of use. Spools of thread, silver, gold, indigo, and pale green, spilled across the tables, and in the center sat a woman, weaving with slow, steady hands. Her hair was long, streaked with silver, and her eyes reflected the shimmer of threads. She did not look up at first, but her voice reached them like a hush of wind through reeds. "Ah," she murmured, "the listeners have found their way here." The boy and the girl glanced at each other. The city had named them listeners before, by the man with the paper birds, the clockmaker, the glassblower. The word felt heavier now, as though carrying quiet responsibility. The woman raised her head, and her gaze was kind but deep, like water hiding stories beneath its surface. "You know what I weave?" The boy shook his head. "Cloth?" The woman smiled faintly. "Not cloth, not exactly. I weave forgotten names." She lifted the strand she had been working on. It shimmered with threads of pale gold and grey, almost translucent. Every name that slips from memory. When the last person who speaks it aloud falls silent, it does. Not vanish. It comes here to me, and I weave it into fabric so the city may remember what the world has let go. The girl stepped closer, her eyes wide. "So every thread is a name?" "Yes," the woman whispered. "A name once spoken with love. A name once whispered in fear. A name once sung, once shouted, once written on a door. Names carry weight. To forget them is not an ending. It is simply a pause. Here they find another way to remain." The boy stared at the loom, watching how the threads crossed and joined. It seemed as though the fabric glowed from within, a tapestry of memory that was both beautiful and quietly aching. "Can we hear them?" he asked softly. The woman nodded. She lifted a strand of woven cloth and held it to his ear. At first he heard nothing, only the faint hum of thread. But then, like a sigh, like a fading echo, he heard a name spoken. A name he did not know, yet it filled him with a strange warmth, as though someone far away had been remembered for a heartbeat. He lowered the cloth carefully, his chest heavy but calm. The girl listened next, and the name she heard brought tears to her eyes, not because she recognized it, but because she felt deep within that someone once had. The woman watched them with tenderness. Names are not only for the living, they belong to the city, to the sky, to the silence itself. And when no one remembers, the threads remember for us. She rose from her stool and guided them to a large tapestry hanging on the far wall. It shimmered with countless colors, strands weaving in and out like constellations. This is the city's memory of names. Every street you walk is stitched with these threads. Every whisper of wind carries them. You may not know them, but they surround you. The children gazed at the tapestry, unable to count the patterns, unable to take it all in. It was too vast, too alive, too filled with quiet remembrance. The boy asked, almost a whisper, "Will our names be here too someday?" The woman smiled, her eyes reflecting the shimmer of the threads. "Yes, when your footsteps have faded and your voices have grown quiet, your names will still shine here, not lost, woven." The girl touched the fabric with trembling fingers. "That's not sad, is it?" "No," the woman said gently. "It is the way the city keeps love alive." Before they left, she handed them each a small spool of glowing thread. "Carry this," she told them. "If ever you feel forgotten, hold it, and remember, nothing spoken with care is truly lost." The children thanked her in hushed voices, their hearts heavier yet steadier, as if the threads had already been woven into them. As they stepped back into the night, the strands of cloth at the archway brushed their shoulders, and both heard faint names, soft, passing, but full of warmth. They carried the sound with them through the streets, and long after they had gone to sleep, they dreamed of a sky woven with countless glowing threads, each one carrying a name that would never fully fade. The boy and the girl had learned to follow not only the streets of Wizard City, but also the quiet invitations that stirred in their hearts. That evening they felt it again, a tug soft as a thread of wind. They followed it past shops closing for the night, past windows glowing with lantern fire, until they reached a narrow staircase leading down into the ground. At the base of the steps, they found a heavy wooden door carved with moons. When the boy pushed it open, a hush like falling snow greeted them. Inside stretched a vast library, lit not by lamps but by a faint blue glow that seemed to come from the shelves themselves. The air smelled of old paper and something cooler, like midnight air over still water. Rows upon rows of books stretched into the distance, each bound in pale covers that shimmered faintly. Unlike the city's other places, this library felt weightless, as though sound and time had both grown slow. At a long table sat the librarian. Her hair was black, streaked with silver, her robes pale as mist. She did not look up right away, but traced her fingers along the spine of a book, as though listening to it breathe. When she finally raised her eyes, they were calm, deep, and kind. "You've come to read what was never dreamed," she said softly. The children stepped closer, their voices low, instinctively hushed. "What do you mean?" asked the girl. The librarian placed her hand on one of the books. "These are the nights when someone lay down to sleep, but no dreams came. Emptiness, weariness, silence. Those nights are not lost. They come here, written, down in pages that no one remembers writing." The boy touched a spine gently. "But if there were no dreams, what is there to read?" The librarian opened the book before her. Inside, the pages were not blank. They shimmered with faint lines of light, like water rippling. She tilted it toward them. Not stories, not adventures, but feelings. The weight of stillness. The shape of exhaustion. The echo of hearts too tired to wander into dreaming. The children leaned close. On the page they saw not words but faint patterns, shadows of faces resting, outlines of hands folded against blankets, the small quiet of someone staring at the ceiling in the dark. The girl whispered, "It's sad." The librarian's smile was soft, not sad, necessary. Just as the city gathers laughter and silence, it gathers even the nights when nothing seemed to come. Those nights matter too. They are part of living. She led them down one aisle. The shelves. Here hummed faintly the glow brighter. Some dreamless nights are heavy with sorrow, others are light with rest, but all belong here. They remind us that absence is not emptiness. It is simply another kind of presence. The boy ran his fingers along the spines, and one book trembled. Faintly beneath his touch, he pulled it free. It was thin, glowing pale blue. When he opened it, he saw, nothing at first, Then slowly a faint picture formed, a child lying awake, staring at the dark, waiting for a dream that never came. The boy felt a pang, as though the emptiness had reached out to touch him. He closed the book carefully and looked at the librarian. Why keep them? Why remember nights with nothing? Her eyes grew thoughtful. Because even nothing leaves a mark. A pause is still part of the song, and one day someone will read these pages and find comfort in knowing they were not alone. In their quiet, the girl thought of the silent garden, of how the pause between sounds had felt like its own gift. She nodded slowly, understanding. The librarian guided them back to her table. "Would you like to keep one?" she asked. The boy hesitated. "Are we allowed?" The woman's smile deepened. "These books are not guarded. They are meant to be carried just as dreams are. Choose one each, and when you are ready, the pages will open." The children selected carefully. The girl chose a small book bound in grey, its glow soft and steady. The boy chose a heavier volume, its cover faintly warm. The librarian placed her hands over theirs, blessing the choice. "Remember," she said, "not every night must hold a dream. Some nights are simply for resting, and rest too is a story." The children thanked her. Their voices seemed to dissolve into the hush of the library, becoming part of it. When they left, the wooden door closed behind them with a sigh, like turning pages. As they climbed back into the night air, the boy and girl clutched their books to their chests. The city above seemed brighter, lanterns swaying as though glad they had returned. That night, when the boy finally drifted into sleep, he dreamed not of wonders or rivers or paper birds, but of stillness, a long, deep rest, like floating on water, where even without visions he felt held. And in the morning, he understood that even dreamless nights had their own quiet magic. The boy and girl woke one morning to a sky the color of slate. Clouds leaned heavily over Wizard City, swollen with quiet promise. The air carried that scent of waiting, the cool hush that comes before the first drop falls. They decided to wander. Rain did not frighten them anymore. It felt like the city, speaking in a softer tongue. As they walked, the first drops began to fall, gentle, almost shy. People hurried beneath awnings and pulled their cloaks close, but the children lingered, letting the cool water dot their faces. It was then they noticed her. A small child, younger than either of them, sat at the edge of a courtyard with jars and cups lined carefully on the stones. She did not flinch at the rain. Instead, she tilted each vessel precisely, watching how the drops fell inside. Some jars were wide, catching as many drops as they could. Others were narrow, holding only a few, as though chosen carefully. Curious, the boy approached. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. The child looked up. Her eyes were dark and serious, though not unfriendly. "I'm collecting raindrops." The girl tilted her head. "Why?" The child smiled faintly, as if the answer was simple. "Because every drop remembers where it has been. The clouds, the rivers, the sea, even the tears people once cried. Each drop carries a memory. If you keep it, you keep the story." The boy and girl knelt beside her, watching. The rain gathered, steadily now, tapping against rooftops, running along gutters, slipping into the little jars. The sound was steady and soothing, like fingers drumming softly on a table. The child picked up one jar and held it to her ear. She closed her eyes. "This one remembers the ocean. I can hear waves." She passed it to the girl. When the girl listened, she too could faintly hear it, like the hush and roar of tides echoing within glass. The boy tried another jar. When he listened, he heard a quieter sound, the soft patter of footsteps through a forest, leaves dripping after rain. His chest warmed. He had never seen that forest, but the drop carried it anyway. "How do you know which drop remembers what?" he asked. The child shrugged. "You don't choose them. They choose you." For a while, the three of them sat in the rain, gathering drops together. Their hair grew wet, cloaks heavy, but they didn't mind. Each jar sang its own faint song when lifted to the ear. Sometimes laughter, sometimes rivers, sometimes silence deep as night. At last the girl asked, "What do you do with them once you've caught enough?" The child looked thoughtful. "Sometimes I give them away, to people who need them. Someone lonely might need the sound of the sea. Someone tired might need the hush of rain on leaves. And sometimes, she added softly, I keep them for myself, to remind me that the world is larger than my own street. The boy thought of the library of dreamless nights, of how even absence had its own story. Now, hearing raindrops sing, of oceans and forests, he felt the same truth. Even the smallest things carried whole worlds within them. When the rain slowed, the jars gleamed with tiny pools of captured memory. The child gathered them gently, tucking them into a basket. She gave one to the boy and one to the girl. For you, she said simply. The boy's jar was cool against his palms. He raised it to his ear. The faint sound of wind through mountains whispered inside. The girl listened to hers and smiled. It carried the song of bells far away. Thank you, they said together. The child nodded. Take care of them. Drops. Don't last forever, but the memory they carry will stay even when the water's gone. They parted gently, the boy and girl leaving with their gifts. As they walked back through the damp streets, lanterns flickering awake in the grey light, the boy thought of how much the city trusted its children to hold its secrets, not with power, not with authority, but with listening, patience, and care. That night he placed his jar by his bedside. As he drifted into sleep, he could hear the whisper of mountain winds, carrying him upward in his dreams. The girl, clutching her bell-song jar, slept with a smile, as though she had already travelled somewhere far and kind. And above them the city rested, rain drying from its stones, knowing that even its smallest drops were safe in small hands. The boy and the girl woke earlier than usual, stirred by something they could not name. The sky was still dark, only the faintest blush of silver brushing its edges. The streets of Wizard City lay hushed, lanterns flickering their last breaths before the sun arrived. They walked without speaking, guided by that soft tug the city often gave them, an invisible hand leading them forward. Their path bent toward the river, where mists curled over the water like drifting veils. Bridges arched across in graceful lines, their stones damp with night dew. One bridge in particular seemed to wait for them. Its arch was lower, its stones darker, as though it had soaked up years of rain and footsteps. No one else was there. The boy stepped onto it first, and as his foot touched the stone, a low hum stirred beneath him. He froze. The girl tilted her head, listening. The hum rose softly, like the pluck of a string deep within the bridge itself. They exchanged a glance, and then together, step by step, they crossed. With each footfall, the sound grew richer. The stones seemed to carry music inside them, notes that shimmered through the mist. It was not a song with words, but a weaving of tones, low, high, soft, trembling. The girl whispered, "It's singing." And indeed it was. The bridge's voice shifted with the pace of their steps. When they walked slowly, it hummed low and long like a lullaby. When they moved faster, it quickened, rippling like laughter. If they paused, the sound faded, waiting, patiently, only to return the moment they moved again. The boy knelt, pressing his hand against the stone. The vibration pulsed through his palm, steady and kind. He thought of the raindrop jars, of the dreamless books, of the silent garden. The city's heart was everywhere, even beneath their feet. As they reached the center of the bridge, the sky opened just enough for dawn to spill across the river. The first rays of light touched the mist, turning it into pale gold. The bridge's song swelled fuller now, like a choir rising at sunrise. The children stood still, listening. The music did not belong to them, and yet it welcomed them. It was a song of beginnings, of mornings stretching their arms wide, of rivers carrying stories forward, of the city breathing awake after long night. The girl closed her eyes. "It sounds like hope," the boy nodded. "It sounds like remembering, too, like every morning the city has ever seen." They lingered until the sun rose higher and the last mist slipped away. Slowly, the music softened. By the time daylight warmed the stones, the bridge was quiet again, just stone beneath their feet. "Does it sing every day?" the boy asked. The girl looked thoughtful. "Maybe, but maybe it only sings when someone listens." They crossed to the far side and looked back. Already the bridge seemed ordinary again, busy with the first stirrings of carts and footsteps. No one else noticed. The secret folded itself neatly back into silence, waiting for the next dawn, the next listener. The children carried the song with them as they left. It played quietly inside their chests, like a memory that refused to fade. And though the world around them grew louder with morning noise, a part of them stayed on that bridge, listening to the voice of stone and sunrise. That night, as the boy lay in bed, he dreamed he was walking across endless bridges, each one humming with a different note. Together, they wove a song too vast to describe. When he woke, he could still feel the faint thrum beneath his ribs, as if the city itself had stitched its music into him. And he knew, with the certainty of dawn, that some songs are not meant to be sung aloud, but carried quietly in the heart. By now, the boy and girl had learned that Wizard City revealed its wonders not in grand halls or crowded plazas, but in corners where few thought to look. That morning, they wandered down a street so narrow it seemed squeezed between two taller ones, a lane lined with shuttered shops that most people hurried past without a glance. At the end of the lane stood a small wooden door with a sign, too, faded to read. Its window was cloudy, but behind the glass they saw a faint flicker of golden dust, like light caught inside a jar. Curious, they pushed the door open. A bell tinkled, not high and bright, but low, as though tired from years of ringing. Inside, the air smelled of oil and cedar. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with clocks of every shape, towering grandfather clocks, tiny pocket watches, odd contraptions with spinning wheels and shifting sands. Some ticked steadily, others had long since stilled, their hands frozen at forgotten hours. Behind the counter sat the watchmaker. He was an old man with a beard soft as clouds and eyes that seemed to gaze both at them and beyond them. In his hands he held a small broken watch, turning it gently as if it were alive. The boy and girl stepped forward, hesitant. The man looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that made the room feel warmer. "You've found me," he said in a voice deep and quiet. "Most don't. Or perhaps most no longer remember to look." The girl asked softly, "What do you fix?" The watchmaker held up the broken watch. "I mend the hours people think they've lost, the mornings that slipped away unnoticed, the afternoons swallowed by worry. The nights they thought were wasted. Those hours don't vanish, they wait here inside these clocks until someone cares to claim them again." The boy frowned gently. "But you can't really get back lost time, can you?" The man's eyes twinkled. "Not in the way people expect, but you can remember that it mattered. Even the hours you thought were empty shaped you. I fix them so they can be felt again, not lived but honored." He beckoned them closer. On his workbench sat a clock with its hands stuck at 3 o'clock. This belonged to a woman who once sat waiting for someone who never arrived. She thought the hour was wasted. But when I opened the gears, I found it full of her hope, her patience, her quiet love. I polished it, wound it, and now the hour ticks again, reminding her that even waiting carries meaning. The girl's chest ached softly at his words. She touched one of the clocks, its glass cool under her fingers. "Do they all hold memories?" "Every one," the watchmaker said. "Some are joyful, some heavy, some so ordinary they seem invisible, but together they are the measure of a life." He placed the broken watch he'd been working on into the boy's hands. "Try." The boy turned it carefully. The hands trembled but did not move. Yet as he held it, he felt something stir, an image of himself sitting by the bakery window years ago, watching bread rise golden in the ovens, a time he had forgotten, but not lost. His chest filled with a warmth both sweet and aching. He gave the watch back with reverence. The watchmaker nodded. "See? Not gone. Only waiting." The girl asked, "Do you ever run out of hours to mend?" The old man chuckled softly. "Never. People lose hours every day, but that means I will always have work, and always more reminders to give back." For a long while, the three of them sat together in the little shop, surrounded by steady ticking and deep silences. The clocks seemed to breathe around them, each carrying fragments of lives too easily overlooked. At last, the watchmaker reached beneath the counter and handed them each a small, simple timepiece. The boy's was a brass pocket watch, the girl's a delicate clock no bigger than her palm. "These are yours," he said. They do not measure minutes or hours. They will remind you only when you are present. Hold them and you will feel the weight of now, not what has passed, not what will come, only the moment in your hands. The children thanked him. Their voices hushed as though in a chapel. When they stepped back outside, the city's noise greeted them, the creak of carts, the chatter of vendors, the laughter of early children. But both the boy and girl felt different, as though each sound and step stretched wider than before. The present seemed fuller, richer, alive with the truth that even ordinary seconds could become treasures if noticed. That night, the boy placed his pocket watch under his pillow. The girl set hers by the window, and as they drifted into sleep, the gentle ticking followed them, not to count the hours slipping away, but to remind them that even these, the moments between wakefulness and dream, were worth keeping. One evening, when lanterns were beginning to sway awake and the streets of Wizard City shimmered with their flicker, the boy and the girl wandered into a part of town they had never seen before. The houses here leaned close together, their shutters crooked, their paint faded like memories left too long in the sun. At the end of one lane stood a house with no door, its frame sagged, its windows clouded with dust. Yet something about it drew them closer, as though the air around it still held a pulse. The girl touched the stone wall. "It feels like it's waiting," she whispered. They stepped inside. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of old wood and faint ash. Light filtered through broken shutters in long, soft beams. The house was empty. No chairs, no tables, no beds. Yet as they walked across the creaking floorboards, something stirred, a sound, faint at first, like the echo of steps not their own. The boy stopped. The girl held her breath. The sound came again, soft, measured, like someone crossing the floor just behind them. But when they turned, no one was there. The house, they realized, remembered. Each step they took awakened echoes of those who had once lived there. The boy touched the wall and felt the faint tremor of laughter. The girl pressed her ear to the floorboards and heard the shuffle of small feet racing across it long ago. "It remembers everyone," she murmured. As they moved deeper, the echoes grew clearer. In one corner, they felt the weight of a family. Meal, spoons clinking gently, voices low but warm. In another, the hush of someone weeping quietly near the window. The walls carried the imprint of lives stacked one upon another, as though time had never truly left. The boy knelt by the fireplace, now cold and crumbled. When he touched the stone, a sudden warmth filled him, not from fire, but from the memory of countless flames once tended there, keeping nights gentle. He closed his eyes and felt himself sitting among those long-vanished families, wrapped in the glow of belonging. The girl stood in the doorway of what might once have been a bedroom. She felt the house breathe around her, carrying sighs of dreams once dreamt, lullabies once sung, promises once whispered in the dark. She reached out her hand, and the air seemed to hold it, tender and unseen. Neither spoke much. Words seemed too loud for such a place. Instead, they wandered slowly, letting the echoes rise and fall. The house did not cling to sorrow or joy alone. It carried both with equal tenderness, as though every footstep mattered, every presence worthy of remembering. At last they came to the stairway. The wood was broken, the steps unsafe. Yet as they stood at the base, they felt the weight of feet that had once climbed eagerly, children rushing upward, parents moving slower behind. For a moment, the boy almost saw them, shadows of a family long gone but still alive in the rhythm of the stairs. The girl whispered, "It's like the house loved them. All of them." The boy nodded. "And it still loves them, even though they're gone." The fading. Light outside grew golden, slipping through cracks in the roof. Dust drifted in the beams like slow-falling stars. The house hummed faintly, a chorus of footsteps from every time layered into one. The children stood in the center of the room and bowed their heads, not to any person, but to the house itself, in gratitude. For keeping memory safe, for carrying voices too easily lost, for showing that even walls and floorboards can hold love. When they stepped back outside, the street was quiet. The house behind them sagged and sighed, appearing empty once more. But the boy and girl knew better. Inside, footsteps still lingered, waiting patiently for those who would listen. That night, as the boy drifted into sleep, he dreamed not of faces or places, but of footsteps walking beside him. Hundreds, thousands, steady and gentle, reminding him that no one truly walks alone. The boy and the girl had begun to notice that Wizard City always offered its secrets at the edges of light, at dawn, at dusk, in silence, or just as lamps flickered awake. That evening was no different. The Easter lanterns had been lit, but the streets still wore the long shadows of night. Shapes stretched across walls and cobblestones, moving gently with every flicker of flame. In one quiet square, they saw her. A woman sat on the steps of an old fountain, her cloak pooling around her, her face half hidden in the folds of dusk. At first she looked like another shadow herself, thin and long against the stone, but then they noticed how the other shadows leaned toward her, gathering around her feet as though listening. The boy and girl approached slowly. The woman's voice reached them before her face did, low, steady, almost like the hum of the bridge. They once crossed at dawn. "Come closer," she said, "and listen. They've been waiting." The girl tilted her head. "Who's waiting?" The woman's smile was faint, visible only when the lantern's flame caught it. "The shadows. They are not empty darkness. They are what remains when light remembers where it has been. Every shadow carries a story of something once seen, once touched. I listen and they speak." She gestured to the stone wall beside her. The children leaned closer. A wide shadow stretched there, cast by nothing more than a crooked lamp post. At first it was still. Then faintly they felt something stir. The shadow whispered, not with words but with impressions. They felt the echo of all the people who had passed this street, their shapes once thrown long across these very stones. It was as though the shadow had gathered every step into itself, keeping them long after the people had gone. The boy shivered. "It remembers them." The woman nodded. "Shadows always do." She raised her hand and the shadows shifted. One curled into the outline of a child with arms lifted, another into the shape of a woman bent over in thought. They flickered faintly, soft as candle flame, yet they carried the weight of presence. The girl whispered, "Are they ghosts?" "No," the woman said gently. "Not ghosts. Just echoes. Gentle reminders. Shadows are memory's quiet companions. They keep us from being forgotten." The children sat beside her. The square was silent except for the fountain's slow drip and the soft crackle of lanterns. The woman began to hum, and the shadows moved with her voice, swaying like grass in wind. "Even the smallest shadow carries worth," she told them. "The shadow of a bird flying overhead, the shadow of a hand reaching out, the shadow of a tear on a cheek. They are proof that light has touched us, proof that we have passed through the world." The boy thought of the watchmaker and his hours, the house that remembered footsteps, the jars of raindrops filled with faraway songs, and now shadows too, carrying stories in silence. Wizard City seemed to hold every fragment of life, not letting even darkness go to waste. He asked softly, "Do shadows stay forever?" The woman shook her head. "No. They shift, they fade, they vanish when light changes. But the memory of them remains, even when the shape is gone. That is enough." The girl reached out her hand. A shadow stretched across her palm like a thin ribbon. For a moment she imagined it was holding her hand back. The thought filled her with warmth, though nothing touched her skin. The woman watched her kindly. "One day, children, you will cast long shadows too. They will stretch beyond your sight. Do not fear that. It only means you have walked in light." The boy and girl sat with her until the lanterns grew dim and stars pierced the sky above. The shadows thinned, softening back into the corners of the square. The woman rose slowly, her cloak trailing like ink. "Carry this with you," she said. "Remember, even what seems dark may only be another kind of memory." Then she walked away, and for a moment her shadow stretched long across the square, swaying gently as though waving goodbye. The children stayed until it faded, then finally turned homeward. That night, as the boy lay awake, he watched the moonlight spill across his room, weaving shadows on the walls. They felt less like darkness now and more like company, quiet, faithful, and kind. The boy and the girl had learned by now that Wizard City revealed its wonders in the quietest hours, when most of the world slept. So one night, when the air felt wide and endless, they slipped out beneath the sky. The streets were hushed, lanterns low, and above them the heavens stretched vast and bright, stitched with stars. They wandered until the city thinned, until they stood on the edge of a hill where rooftops dropped away, and the night opened like a sea. From here they could see more stars than they had ever imagined, countless, trembling, alive. It was then they noticed her. A figure stood in the grass, her robes dark as midnight, but dusted with silver threads that glimmered faintly. In her hands, she carried a long net, delicate and shimmering like spider silk spun from moonlight. She raised it to the sky, moving with calm patience. The boy and girl watched as a star streaked suddenly downward, falling in a trail of fire. Just before it vanished, the woman lifted her net. The star slipped into it as gently as a bird into a nest. She lowered the net, and the light settled in her palm, small now, soft as a candle flame. The children gasped. The woman turned and smiled. "Ah, you've come at the right time. Few are awake when the stars decide to wander." The girl stepped closer, eyes wide. "You catch them?" "I keep them," the woman said softly. She cupped the little light, which pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. "Every star that falls carries a wish too heavy to stay in the sky. If I do not catch them, they scatter and are lost. But if I hold them gently, the wish remains." The boy asked, almost in a whisper, "What happens to them then?" The woman gestured to the satchel at her side. It glowed faintly, filled with soft sparks. "I keep them safe until the time comes. Some are returned to the sky when the heavens are ready. Others are placed in the hands of those who need them most. A star never truly vanishes. It only changes who carries it." The children sat in the grass beside her, tilting their faces upward. The night sky was restless, as though stirred by invisible winds. Another streak of silver split the darkness, and again she lifted her net, catching it with ease. She passed it carefully to the girl. It was warm, not hot, and lighter than a feather. When the girl held it, she heard something faint inside, like the echo of a child's voice wishing to be held, wishing never to be lonely. Her chest tightened with tenderness. She placed the star back in the woman's hands with reverence. The boy was given one next. His star hummed low, carrying a wish he could not quite put into words, something about belonging, about finding home. He held it close until it dimmed, then handed it back carefully. The woman nodded approvingly. "You hear them well. Most cannot. Stars trust children more easily, for you have not yet learned to doubt their voices." For a long while they sat with her, watching the heavens spill their silver paths. Some stars fell fast, others lingered, each caught gently, each cradled. The satchel at her side grew brighter, filled with the weight of other people's hopes. At last the woman lowered her net and looked at them with eyes as deep as night. "When you leave here, remember, not every wish comes true, but no wish is wasted. Some become light for others, some travel farther than you'll ever know, and some stay in your own chest glowing quietly, waiting for the right moment." The children nodded, carrying her words like lanterns inside. When they finally rose to leave, she gave them each a small shard of starlight, no bigger than a tear. "Keep these close," she said. "They will not burn, nor fade, but they will remind you that even when you feel small, you are part of something vast." The boy and girl thanked her, their voices hushed as though speaking in a temple. They walked back down the hill slowly, the city stretching below them, its lanterns flickering, like a reflection of the sky above. Each held their shard close, feeling its faint hum against their palms. That night the boy dreamed of walking among constellations, stars bowing gently as he passed. The girl dreamed of lifting her shard into the dark and watching it guide her home like a beacon. And when dawn finally brushed Wizard City, both woke, with the certainty that even the smallest light has the power to keep someone from being lost. The boy and the girl had wandered many streets by now, yet there were still corners of Wizard City that seemed to wait for the right night to reveal themselves. One such evening, When fog clung low to the cobblestones and the air was cool with the breath of autumn, they followed a faint trail of light through an alleyway. The glow was soft, uneven, like something half-remembered. It led them beyond the last row of houses, to a gate of rusted iron. The gate creaked as they pushed it open, and beyond lay a garden unlike any they had seen. Lanterns of every size and shape rested there. Some hung from skeletal trees whose branches held no leaves, only chains of iron. Some lay nestled in the grass, their frames bent or broken. Others leaned against one another like tired travelers. Each glowed faintly, not with flame, but with a memory of light. The girl whispered, "It looks like a graveyard." The boy nodded. "But it doesn't feel sad." Indeed, the garden was not heavy with sorrow. It was gentle, like an old lullaby sung to someone already asleep. The lantern's glow shifted softly, like fireflies caught between waking and dreaming. Caretaker appeared then, a man with kind eyes and soot-stained hands. His coat smelled faintly of oil and ash. He carried no tools but a small brush, with which he gently wiped the dust from a lantern's cracked glass. "You've found the lantern bones," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Every light in this city one day finds its way here. Nothing burns forever, not even fire, but even a lantern deserves rest." The children walked carefully among the rows. Some lanterns were tall and ornate, carved with patterns of stars. Others were plain, dented, barely holding their shape. Yet each one glowed with the faintest pulse, like a heart beating slowly in its sleep. The boy asked, "Do they still remember what they once lit?" The caretaker nodded. "They remember every step, every word spoken under their glow. They remember laughter spilling out of taverns, lovers meeting in secret, children running home late. They are filled with nights." He placed a hand on one lantern so worn it could barely hold its frame. For a moment its glow brightened, and the children saw shadows of people walking down an old street, long gone now, their faces soft but indistinct. The vision faded, leaving only the faint warmth. The girl knelt beside a lantern shaped like a teardrop. She touched its cool frame and heard a faint echo, a mother singing to her child under its light, many years ago. The sound was so tender it brought a lump to her throat. The caretaker smiled at her gently. "Each lantern carries whispers of the lives it touched. That is why we do not throw them away. We lay them here, where they may rest in dignity, where their final glows can warm the ground." The boy looked around, feeling awe settle into his chest. "So even when their light is gone, something of them stays." "Yes," said the caretaker. "Even broken light is still a gift." They followed him deeper into the garden, where the lanterns grew fewer but brighter. Some shone steady, refusing to dim entirely. "These are the lanterns that belong to places that no longer exist," he explained. "A market that has faded, a bridge torn down, a house forgotten. When the places vanish, the lanterns still hold their memory." The children stood silently before them, feeling the weight of time. It was not heavy like grief, but gentle, like a reminder that everything passes and yet nothing is truly lost. Before they left, the caretaker stopped them at the gate. He pressed a small shard of glass into each of their palms. It shimmered faintly, like the inside of an old lantern. "Carry these," he said. "When you find yourselves in darkness, they will not show the way, but they will remind you that you are not alone. Every light, even the faintest, has companions." The children thanked him softly, their voices hushed. As they walked back into the fog-draped city, they each closed their fists around the shards. And though the night was dark, they felt warmth in their palms, as though countless old lanterns were walking with them, their bones glowing gently through the ages. The boy and the girl had begun to notice that Wizard City often slept and woke. In ways unlike any other place, streets would vanish into mist, clocks would pause in their ticking, and whole neighborhoods seemed to hush as though listening to something unseen. One such night, as the moon leaned low and heavy, they followed the sound of water. It was not the ordinary rush of a stream. This water sang. The song was soft, like a lullaby hummed by someone half asleep. It drifted through the alleys until they found themselves standing on the bank of a wide river they had never seen before. By day, it did not exist, but tonight it stretched silver and endless through the heart of the city, glowing faintly under the moonlight. The girl whispered, "It wasn't here yesterday." The boy nodded. "Maybe it only comes when people dream." As they watched, they saw shapes flickering in the current, images rising and falling with the ripples. They leaned closer, and the river revealed its secret. A child's dream drifted past, a small paper boat carrying her across a lake of stars. Then a baker's dream followed, warm bread rising endlessly, filling the air with comfort. Then a teacher's dream, where words on a page turned into tiny birds and flew away. Each dream glowed faintly, made of light and memory, carried downstream. Like lanterns set afloat, an old ferryman stood nearby, his boat tied to a post. His beard was long, his eyes patient, and in his hands he held an oar carved with countless names. "You found the dreaming river," he said, in a voice that carried the hush of many nights. "It comes only when the city sleeps deeply enough. Every dream born here finds its way into this water. The river keeps them safe and carries them until dawn." The boy asked, wide-eyed, "Where do they go?" The ferryman gestured to the horizon, where the river disappeared into the mist. Some returned to their dreamers, leaving them with quiet smiles. Others travel far away, slipping into the hearts of strangers who need them. A dream never truly belongs to one person. Like water, it flows where it is needed. The girl crouched and touched the surface. For a moment her reflection dissolved, and she saw instead a dream floating toward her. It was small, fragile, almost translucent. She held her breath as it brushed her fingertips. She found herself standing in a meadow, soft with wildflowers. A voice whispered to her, an echo of someone wishing not to be forgotten. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, though she could not say whose longing it carried. When she blinked, she was back at the riverbank, her hand trembling slightly. The ferryman nodded knowingly. "Dreams ask nothing of us but to be witnessed. To remember them, even faintly, is to honor the dreamer." The boy and girl stepped into the ferryman's boat. He pushed them gently into the current, and the river carried them silently beneath bridges that had not existed until that moment. As they floated, dreams drifted around them. One brushed the boy's shoulder, a blacksmith dreaming of the warmth of his father's hands guiding his own. Another brushed the girl's hair, a cat dreaming of sunlight and quiet window sills. They sat together in stillness, letting the dreams pass, feeling both heavy and light at once. After a while, the ferryman guided them back to the bank where they had begun. He did not ask for payment. He only said, "Remember that every dream you've ever had still floats somewhere in this river, waiting for you when you are ready. None are ever wasted." The children stepped back onto the cobblestones. Already the river was thinning, its glow dissolving as dawn approached. By the time the first bird stirred in the city, only a faint dampness remained on the stones, as if the river had been a long, gentle breath that had now faded. The boy and the girl walked home in silence, carrying the hush of the dreaming river inside them. That night, when they closed their eyes, they wondered if their own dreams would float once again under the moon, carried downstream to rest among countless others. And with that thought, they drifted into sleep, already part of the current. The boy and the girl had learned by now that Wizard City always carried hidden doors. Some opened with keys, some with silence, and some with nothing more than the willingness to notice. On a mist-veiled morning, when the streets were still empty, far footsteps, they found such a door. It was small, almost shy, tucked between two shops, whose walls leaned inward as though conspiring to hide it. The wood was pale, worn smooth by time and carved with hundreds of faint letters. Some they recognized, others seemed like fragments of words. The girl reached out and traced one. It felt warm under her fingertip. The boy did the same, and the letter glowed faintly, like an ember refusing to fade. The door opened quietly. Inside was a house filled with shelves, not bookshelves, though they looked like it at first, but endless rows of wooden slats covered in tiny tags, each one etched with a name. The air hummed with a strange tenderness, as though the room itself were whispering. An old woman sat at a table near the entrance, her hair silver, her hands steady. She looked up as the children entered. her smile kind but soft, as though she were used to welcoming visitors who didn't know they were about to cry. "You've found the house of forgotten names," she said. "Here we keep what people once spoke and later lost. No name deserves to vanish." The boy looked at the shelves, his chest filling with a quiet ache. "These are all names of people?" "Not only people," she said. "Pets, toys, streets, ships, even trees and mountains. Anything that was once given a name and then left behind finds its way here." The girl stepped closer, reading tags aloud in a whisper. "Isolde, Marrow, Pebble, Junior, Candlefoot." Each word seemed to carry weight, as if saying them gave them a small moment of life again. The woman nodded. "When names are spoken, they brighten. When they are ignored, they dim. My work is only to keep them safe until someone remembers them again." She lifted one tag from the shelf and handed it to the boy. It was carved with the word Elric. The moment he touched it, he saw a brief vision. A child long ago running through fields, his mother calling the name joyfully. Then it faded, leaving only the tag in his palm. The boy's eyes stung. "It feels like they're waiting." "They are," said the woman gently. "Not for anything dramatic, just for someone to care enough to let them exist once more, if only for a breath." The girl wandered deeper into the rows, her fingers brushing along the tags as though she were walking through a forest of names. Some she could not pronounce, filled with sounds like songs. Others were plain yet heavy with memory. She stopped at one that read, "Maple Wing." She whispered it aloud, and for a heartbeat she smelled the sweetness of sap and heard the rustle of wings in distant branches. The vision faded, but warmth lingered in her chest. The woman approached them both and spoke softly. "Children, remember this. Every name you ever give, whether to a friend, a place, a pet stone, or even a star, lives longer than you think. They rest here when forgotten, but they are never truly gone. They wait patiently, trusting that someone will whisper them again." The boy and girl stayed a long while, touching names, whispering them aloud, letting the house glow faintly brighter with each syllable. It felt like tending to a field, watering roots that had nearly dried. When at last they turned to leave, the woman pressed 2 small tags into their hands. The boys read Leora. The girls read Thistle. "Carry them," she said. "Not because they belong to you, but because carrying someone's name is a kind of love. Speak them now and then, and they will never be lost." The children promised. Their voices hushed. As they stepped back into the misty street, they felt the weight of the names in their pockets. It was not heavy, but steady, like a heartbeat. The boy whispered Leora into the air, and the girl whispered Thistle. For a moment, the morning light seemed to pause as though listening, and the names glowed faintly between them. They walked on, knowing they carried not just their own story, but countless others, lives once spoken, now remembered again. The boy and the girl had often heard the toll of the great clock tower, its bells marking the hours across Wizard City. Yet one fog-drenched morning, as they wandered through a square they had never crossed before, they noticed a different tower rising against the sky. It looked older, its stones pale and weather-worn, its face cracked but still gleaming faintly. At first it seemed ordinary, but then the children stopped staring. The hands of the clock were moving slowly, steadily, but not forward, backward. Each tick seemed to pull not just the hour, but the air itself into a softer hush. Time didn't feel broken here. It felt unhurried, as though the world were breathing in and never exhaling. At the tower's base sat a caretaker, a man with spectacles perched crookedly on his nose. He was writing in a thick ledger, though his pen hovered more often than it moved, as if he were waiting for the right moment to record. The boy asked, "Why does your clock go the wrong way?" The man looked up and smiled faintly. "Wrong?" "No, not wrong. This clock does not hurry us forward, it carries us gently back." The girl tilted her head. "Back to what?" "To what we've already lived," the man said. "Every tick of this clock recalls a moment just past, holding it a little longer, so we may listen again. It does not erase nor undo, it simply lingers." He gestured toward the tower. "Watch closely." The children gazed at the clock's face. As the hands crept backward, The air around them shimmered. For a moment, the boy heard the sound of laughter, his own from earlier that morning, when he had slipped on wet cobblestones and laughed with his sister. The girl heard the flutter of a sparrow's wings, the very one that had startled from a tree moments ago. It was as though the tower was replaying their own day in gentle fragments, allowing them to hold what would otherwise already be gone. "The," boy whispered. "It's like remembering, but stronger." The caretaker nodded. "Yes, this clock reminds us that time does not vanish, it gathers. Every breath you've taken, every sound, every kindness, it is all still here, resting behind you. Most clocks push us forward without pause, but this one lets us sit a little, longer with what we have loved." The children followed him inside. The tower's interior was filled with gears that turned not with urgency, but with a patient grace. Each one ticked in reverse, carrying echoes in their rhythm. The girl placed her hand against one gear. For a moment, she was back in her grandmother's kitchen, smelling warm bread, hearing the low hum of a lullaby. The memory washed over her so clearly, she almost cried. The caretaker spoke softly, as though aware of her ache. "It does not trap you in the past. It simply lets you remember with warmth instead of loss." The boy asked, "Does it ever stop?" The man shook his head. "No. When the sun rises, it slows. When the moon climbs, it quickens, but always, always it moves backward. For as long as there are moments worth holding, the clock will tick." They climbed the stairs until they reached the bell room. The bells were enormous, their surfaces etched with tiny words. The children leaned closer and realized the words were memories. First words spoken, promises made, laughter shared, tears shed. "When the bells toll," the caretaker said, "they ring with all that has been lived. That is why they sound so deep, so tender. Each note is filled with yesterday." The boy and girl stood between the bells, the air cool and still. When the clock struck, the sound rolled through them like a tide. For a breathless moment, they felt as if they were made of memories themselves, woven from yesterday's light. Yesterday's voices, yesterday's touch. The girl whispered, "It feels like home." The caretaker nodded slowly. "Yes, because no matter how far forward you go, home is always a step behind, waiting for you." When at last they descended the tower, the hands still moving gently backward, the children felt unafraid of time. It no longer seemed like something running away from them. Instead, it felt like a companion, walking just behind, carrying every moment they had ever loved. As they stepped back into the square, the boy glanced once more at the tower. Its bells were silent now, but he could still feel their echo in his chest. He realized that even if the world hurried forward, he carried within him a clock of his own. Every memory ticked softly there, never lost. And with that thought, he smiled, knowing he would never truly be without the past.